So hi there, welcome to another edition of the OpenIntro Podcast with myself, Joel Blake. This is the place where we get to talk to many great business leaders and really get an understanding about who they are and why they do what they do. So today I'm really pleased to introduce Ian Fishwick. I am not going to steal his thunder. Ian is an absolute legend in the game and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So Ian, how are you today?
Pretty cool. Nice to see you, Joel.
Yeah, you too, sir. We're going to really get into some really great conversations today, I'm sure, and we really want to capture, a bit about obviously your journey, what you've learned, and obviously insights for our viewers to take forward. But I'd like to start by really asking you, why do you do what you do? What's the mission behind why you do what you do?
I think the simple answer to anybody, if you're going to keep it going for a long period of time, is you've got to enjoy it. Have fun. I've worked in various tech businesses for 4 decades, and I love the constant change of technology, and I also love the challenge of working with people and trying to get the best out of them and do special things.
Absolutely amazing. But where did the journey start then for you? How did this all kick off?
I was an MD and chief exec for 29 years, from 1990 to 2018, and I had the honour of reporting 29 consecutive years. Right, so across 4 businesses and an untold number of economic recessions and crises and what have you, I just kept going. And along that incredible journey, I had the honour of being named UK Chief Exec of the Year on 3 occasions. I've ended up doing 43 mergers and acquisitions in the UK IT and telecoms sector, which means not in terms of value, but in terms of quantity. I'm probably number 3 or 4 on the all-time list. But perhaps one that might resonate with people is I had a corporate life till the age of 41, but at 42, I started a business in a spare bedroom with virtually no money, and eventually I sold it for 100 million. So I've seen both the corporate life and starting with nothing and growing it spectacularly.
I mean, how did it feel starting at kind of 41 to 42? Did you feel like, were you full of, energy to start something new, or were you just tired of corporate life? Like, what made you make that
No.
shift at that age?
I'm going to show you something. So this book, How to Survive and Thrive, was published just before Christmas in 2024. And there's a chapter in there that gives you a brief intro to my business life. And that's a book I wrote with the legendary founder of Reebok, Joe Foster. The proper story is this. Last week in August, first week of September last year, I got a phone call from his management team to say, Joe's not seen you for ages, do you fancy writing a book together? Now, for those who don't know who Joe Foster is, this is the guy from Bolton who, when he finally stood down, he created the biggest trainer company in the world. At that point, it was bigger than Nike and Adidas. He's the man who invented female trainers. Can you imagine a world where there's no such thing as female trainers? Right? And even men only wore them in sports, so they're like tennis shoes or running shoes or whatever. And one last bit about Joe was women found those shoes so comfortable, they started to walk to the gym in them, and therefore he accidentally invented the crossover of trainers to streetwear. So this man changed the world as we know it. The whole concept of wearing trainers and things. Anyway, his management team rang and said, do you want to write a book together? Right? And I said, that's not a phone call you get every day of your life, is it really? Right? And what they said to me is, look, you can probably see the title behind it, it's called How to Survive and Thrive. We know your story basically, which is somebody who had a very successful career, that then had some real difficult problems in the middle of it, but for not your own fault, managed somehow to battle through it and survive, and then went on to do great things. Can we use your story as a kind of template? Right, so if you want to do the quick version, then it's in that book. The real story, I think that this is where sort of anybody who thinks that life's a straight line, it's just not like that. Right. So if I just explain to sort of what happened to me, then hopefully people will resonate with it a little bit. Right. I said I've been in the tech business for 4 decades. I still think that probably the most exciting part of the tech business in the UK was in the late 90s, purely because everything was so new. It was the first time that we could build cable TV, 200 stations rather than 4 and compete with Sky. It was the first time you could actually compete with BT, because this was one of the first countries to be deregulated. But there was a third bit which none of us quite understood at the point, which was we could do this new thing called internet access, right, which went on to be rather big. Right, and that made that made it incredibly exciting because everything we touched was new, right? And the UK started with 100 companies, and it eventually went down to 2 as Telewest and NTL bought everything up, and then eventually they collapsed under the amount of debt that they borrowed buying everybody, and it merged to become what we now know as Virgin Media. That was the entire cable industry. But when there was 2 giant companies, Telewest had 4 big regions, and I ran 2 of the 4. So I was only 35 to 40 years old then, right?
Oh, it's a lot of responsibility at that age then.
Yeah, and I ran the bit from Liverpool to Manchester to Blackpool, everything from digging up the streets to physically launching TV and internet and everything. And then I came down south to merge 5 cable companies together and go from Kent, Essex, London, and London, north of it, to create giant London and the south east. So when it went to move from 4 regions to 1, there was an expectation from a lot of people, mistakenly me as well, that I might be the boss of the UK. And I got down to the last 2. But I was 40 and the other guy was 56, 57. And the owners decided to go for the grey hair. And I get it now. It wasn't so good at the time. But the guy turned to me 10 seconds after he'd been appointed and said, "There's no possibility I want the young pretender sat on my shoulder, so I'm making you redundant immediately." So literally 10 seconds after thinking I was about to be the boss of the UK, I was suddenly at home thinking, wow.
Actually, Ian, can I interject there? Because that's a really poignant point there, because from a leader's point of view, how did that make you feel? You'd put all the effort and work into it.
This whole 18 months is a remarkable story, because I went home thinking, wow, wasn't expecting that, was your first thing.
Yeah.
And then you think, hang on, redundancy is not about being a bad person. I can't tell myself I've done things wrong. I almost became the boss of the UK. And that taught me that it's not just not a bad thing, but the higher you get it in an organisation, the more likely you're going to get stuck in reorganisations and things. Right. And unfortunately, that was in the middle of the dot-com boom. And so Americans rang up pretty immediately and said, look, we hear you didn't get the big job. We've just bought 7 telcos in the UK. It's 250 million turnover. Now, let's look back. This is 25 years ago, so this is serious money at that point. Right. Do you want to run it? And I turned up, and one of many infamous first days, I said to them, look, all these challenges that have been set up, there's only 2 profitable companies in the UK. There's BT and what was then Cable and Wireless. So, how much money are you losing and how much money have we got? And they said, well, we lost 20 million last year and you owe BT 19 million. Could you fix it as quickly as possible? And in what is still far and away the most spectacular turnaround that I ever did, we went from minus 20 million to plus 1.4 in 16 months. Absolutely astonishing, right? And then I got a phone call at midnight one night, because worldwide headquarters was in Atlanta, and they said, we've got no idea you've done this. We couldn't stop the losses in America. We couldn't stop the losses in Europe. So we're going into Chapter 11. And I said to them, well, hang on a minute. I've stopped the losses, but I haven't repaid BT the debt that you gave me. And they said, no. You're coming down with us. And I had to stand up. I had to stand up in front of 440 people and say, look, what you've done is probably the most astonishing turnaround this industry's ever seen. But Chapter 11 tries to rebuild a company. The UK is a lot more brutal, and if you go into administration, then sadly, and this applies to me, and it's no comfort to you, but there's no redundancy payments, there's no notice payments. If you're sent home on Tuesday, you'll be paid until Tuesday. It really is that brutal. So this is no thank you to any of us for what happened. So I ended up back at home again thinking, wow, I've had another spectacular success. One of the greatest turnarounds ever. I'm now sat at home with zero money whatsoever. And that was the point where I must admit, I got seriously depressed, because the dot-com, this is in the middle of the dot-com bubble, and the dot-com bubble burst. And the banks started to pull the debt from everybody. And I was sat there with a CV, chief exec, 250 million. And all of the people I could apply to were going bust. And I couldn't get my head round. I've been so successful and done nothing wrong in my eyes, right? But I felt like sort of one of the golden boys of the industry that had just fallen out of the sky, right? And it took me 3 or 4 months of feeling pretty sorry for myself, to be honest, to realise that, hang on a minute, you got a family to feed, you got mortgages, you're going to have to do something, right? And the only way you're going to get back is if you start again. So I quite literally started on my own with virtually no money, and eventually it was sold for 100 million. So it was a quite spectacular bounce back. But I think the key to it was when we moved from, I was struggling like mad on my own, and then I met my old boss, who'd been working in Poland, and we sat down and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm trying to do this and I can't raise money, and I'm getting really fed up and depressed. And he said 2 sentences that I think, when I look back, changed my life, where he just said, well, I believe in you. And the second bit is, I'll put some of my own money in. And suddenly there was 2 of us, and anybody who's tried to do this, 2 times 1 isn't twice as good. It's a completely different world. There was 2 of us talking about problems. We had 2 contact books. And then suddenly, within a matter of months, we raised the money to start. Right, so sometimes you do need that little bit of help along the way.
But did you feel that you were in the right frame of mind to accept that help, or do you just felt there was no other option? Because sometimes as leaders, we sometimes can't see the opportunity ahead of us. And when an opportunity does come, we might then think pride or ego kicks in and I'm going to do it by myself. But it strikes me that you didn't think like that. But how did you think in that moment when
No,
that
and I'm not going to claim any great credit for that one, because sometimes the easiest choice is when you've got no choice at all.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be honest about it. You know, I was down to the last bit of money I'd got. If I hadn't have done something in the next few weeks, I'd have gone bankrupt, lost my house and everything. You know, and it would have been harder if it had been somebody I didn't know. It was somebody I knew really well and I trusted, right? And sort of that changed my life. And that man then became my mentor for 25 years, right? And that's the next bit, I think, really it is. Anybody who thinks because you're having a great career, you don't need somebody sat behind you who you can quietly bounce things off, right? So I'd strongly recommend anybody having a mentor. I mean, I look back and think what Roger did for me, and he taught me how to think, I think is what he really did. You know, he would say, we'd talk once a week once we'd set the business up, and he'd say, tell me what problems you've got, and don't ever tell me you haven't got any, because that means you don't know what's going on. You know, business is a problem.
Right there. Cut through ego, straight to humility. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
bullshit, let's get on it.
yeah, that's about other things that you say. Business is a problem-solving exercise. That's what it is, right? And then he said to me, tell me what options you've got, but please don't ever tell me you've got one. That's not true in business. There's never only one way of doing it. Then tell me logically why you want to do option 2 or which one you want to do. And then I'll probably say, what are you asking me for then? And it was in getting ready for the meetings that was important, because I think instinctively option 1's the right one, and I couldn't explain it out loud. I'd sit in front of a mirror and think,
Yeah.
I don't know why I believe this. And I'd go away and think again.
At that time, Ian, what was that fog? What stopped you not seeing that at that time? Because often again the solution's in front of us, but we there's like this haze of mist in front of us. But what was that for you at that time?
I think it varies problem to problem. There's some where you've got very clear data in front of you and it's telling you what the answer is. There's others where you need to scratch your head and have a think. So I don't think we should ever fall into the trap of thinking that business is a bit like mathematics, and if you do 2 + 2, you definitely get 4. It's not quite like that. You need to think through why, and there is no risk-free option, which is the least risk way of doing things. But certainly that was the start of, let's build a team around you, right? So yeah, my life's not been a straight line.
I think what's really powerful about what you've said just so far, and we're only 15 minutes in here, that the level of self-acceptance as a leader, you've seemed to have had multiple choices where you've had to look at the external impacts on you, accept them, and be humble enough to say, okay, what do I do next? And be willing to accept that support. Because so often when you've had success as an individual, certainly, I've seen in my experience and with others, that you feel that you've got enough experience to be able to get through the next challenge. But that's not the case at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's like every new challenge is a whole new life in some aspects.
You've given me a great segue in, right? When I finally stood down, I wrote this book, okay, the Street Smart MBA, right? And across those 29 years where I was the boss, I'm going to say never say, I virtually never taught anybody by using PowerPoint slides, right? And the logic of that was I've never seen anybody go home at night and say, wow, you should have seen the slide I saw today. That's just not an sentence that exists. So I taught myself to tell short stories, right? And then this book has got over 100 of them, and they're all very short, 1 to 4 pages. Now this one just segues straight into what you were talking about. This one's called I Like Me, Let's Get Another One, right? And there's a doodle, because I think people have got a visual memory. There's a short story, and at the end it says, my message is simple. And the point you're making, I think, is really key. It is, when you've been quite successful, sometimes you get so busy, you think, what I really need is I need 2 of me. I just need another one. No, you don't. Clearly there's something about you that's made you successful, but the absolute last thing you want is another one of you, because you'll end up with twice as many strengths and you've not fixed any of the weaknesses. What you really want to do is work out, what are the bits I'm not good at? What are the bits I don't like doing? So if I don't like doing it, I'm almost certainly not good at it, and go and get one of them. That's what you really need. And that's right. So the whole, and when I wrote that book, I had about 40 odd of my staff proofreading, and one IT guy wrote back to me and he said, Ian, I now realise I've done that so many times. I Like Me, Let's Get Another One, right? So yeah, you do have to acknowledge what you're not good at almost more than what you are.
It strikes me. I mean, that's golden. That is, to be honest with you. Again, you just get reflecting on mistakes I've made on my own business journey and doing exactly that as well. But I think one of the things I think is also important to mention is the level of inclusion of different, so the level of talent that you have in an organization, it's been able to create a culture that embraces all of those differences. So collectively you create the innovation, you create that difference and change. How did you find the notion of creating inclusive cultures in the organization that you've worked in?
If you don't mind, I'm going to give a slightly long answer to this one because I think this is absolutely fundamentally so important. I'd been in the cable industry about 18 months and my boss rang me up, the guy who later became my mentor, and he said, "You've broken the unholy triangle. We've never seen it before. Could I come and see you and let's talk about how you did it?" And I said, "By all means, you're my boss, you can do what you want, but I don't actually know what the unholy triangle is." And when he turned up, he said, "Very few businesses can get on the growth curve, and you've got the fastest growing business in the industry." He said, "That's the first point of the triangle." The second one is, historically, anybody who grows really, really rapidly leaves a kind of wreckage of customer service behind because they just can't cope with the volume. And particularly in an environment where we go to people's houses and we drill holes in the wall, there's no unending list of what we could do. But you've won the National Customer Service Awards. We've never seen that combination before. And I said to him, "Well, what's the third point of the triangle?" And he said, "Well, money." He said, "Because we did an analysis of every single company that's ever won the National Customer Service Awards, and they'd done it by hiring loads of people." He said, "The customers loved it. You know, you rang up and they answered it within like 5 seconds. There was almost a row of vans waiting to go out to fix a fault. But they'd done it in such a expensive way that if you did a league table of finances, every customer service winner were the worst performing financial ones in the entire industry." Right? He said, "But you're the lowest cost operator." He said, "That's what we mean by you've broken the unholy triangle. You know, what's it telling you?" And I said, "Well, there's huge economies of scale in this industry." Now, going back to the cultural bit, because the most important part of the story is not what we did, but how did we do it. I've been in the industry for about 2 or 3 weeks, and somebody said to me, "The results have come." And I was expecting them to give me some management accounts or some financial numbers to read. And they gave me a book, and I thought, "Well, what's this then?" And I've never seen it before, I've never seen it since. Because of the strangeness of how the government let franchises buy territory. So whilst there are at one point 100 cable companies, there'd be like one in Leeds, one in Coventry, one in somewhere else. So you weren't competitors with each other, you were competing against Sky and BT, just in your own geography. So the trade association said, "Nobody's ever done this before. Why don't we bring all the clever people together? Let's agree all the key performance indicators that you should monitor. Everything from sales, pre-install, install, customer service, change of service, people leaving, bad debt, the entirety of a cradle to grave of a customer. And let's agree apples for apples how you count them." Wow, that's interesting. But more importantly, everybody agreed that they would send the results in every 3 months, but the revolutionary bit was that you wouldn't anonymise it. And the intention was that you'd drive each other better, where the install teams would go, "Well, I'm in Birmingham and Nottingham's just gone past me. They're better than us now. What do we do about it?" Right? And then could we drive an industry better? Right? And I thought, this is it. It's incredible. Right? And I sat down and I read 30 odd pages, and we were bottom, next to bottom, third from bottom. Now this is out of 29 companies at this point. Okay. Bottom, and it went on and on and on across the entire 30 odd KPIs. Now, if it had been one subject, say like customer service or something, you could put a plan together to try and fix that. When you're the bottom or near the bottom of everything, you have a major cultural problem, and this is why I wanted to tell this slightly longer story. And I shut the door unusually for me for 3 hours, just staring at the wall thinking, so what do you do now? What do you do when you've got an endemic cultural problem? Now, when I came out, I said, right, find me a conference centre that can seat 600 people. We've got 11 people. I want no debate. I want half the department in the morning and half the department in the afternoon. Hire as many coaches as you need. We'll do it all in one day. And I walked on stage and showed people this is the concept of the book. And then I made each head of department go and show their own slides. Mm-hmm. Now, you can imagine, it was relentless. Bottom, next to bottom. And the audience was getting quieter and quieter and quieter. And after about an hour, I went on and everybody's thinking, he's going to have a real shout now. No, this is just terrible. And I didn't. What I said to them was, just listen to my accent for a minute. I'm from round here. I live in the middle of all of you. I said, when I first saw this, I went through all the emotions that you must have been through when you saw that. Passion, anger, disappointment, everything says this is wrong, right? But that's not the most important bit. The bit that upset me even more than that was when I was at school, I did economic and social history. And that's the study of the Industrial Revolution. I said, so what I was taught every week for weeks on end was my great, however many it's granddads invented the Industrial Revolution and changed the world. The Northwest, we had coal, canals, cotton, steam, all of it. But every generation after that has gone gradually worse and worse. And over a period of, 8 to 10 generations, every generation has done worse than the previous one, to the point where at that point we had mass unemployment in Liverpool. I said, and I'm sick of it. I don't want to be told that I'm expected to be worse than my dad, and my dad was expected to be worse than my granddad. So has it dawned on you that the only country in the world that can do TV, telephony and internet access is here? So if we could get to the top of this table, then just imagine when you're, say, a granddad or a grandma putting a kid on your knee and just saying, it didn't last for long, but for a brief period we were the best in the world at what we did. I said, how good would that feel? Why don't we just give it a go? And it was a massive gamble, but on both things, I got a standing ovation. And we had 8 sites, and when I went around walking around, the atmosphere was utterly electric, right? And at the end of that year, a bit like a Disney film, we were top, second, third, top on everything. And we were the best in the world at what we did. Now, as often happens then, I got the tap on the shoulder to say, will you go down south and merge these businesses together and try and do it again? And the guy who followed me, for reasons I've never even understood, fell out with the senior management team within about 8 to 10 weeks. Now, you don't move from being the best in the world to being no good overnight. So I can only think that they must have taken the foot off the gas a bit, because at the end of that year, they were mid-table. So let's just come out the detail for a second. Only about 100 people out of those 1,100 changed, so 1,000 of them are about the same. So people, my message is simple. People say, go and hire the best people. Well, not everybody have the best people. If you've got the best accountant in town, I can't have the best accountant in town. So I say, get the best out of people. Those same people in just 3 years have been the worst in the UK, the best in the UK, and then average. So the same people can be good, bad, and average, and it's all down to motivation.
Yeah.
And that's why I say to people, if you're running a team and it's not the best in its industry, start with yourself, not with the team. Ask yourself, why are they not dancing to work? Why do they not love what they do? Because the best teams I've had are the ones who, they don't think it's like work, they just love what they're doing.
Why don't leaders do that, Ian? Why don't they take that stance of looking at themselves first, in your opinion? What stops them by having that sense of honesty in order to be able to then...
I don't think you can generalise and say that they all don't. I think people are people, they're all different. The ones that drive me mad are the people who have a little bit of power and let it go to their head. Right. That's not right. Okay, so there's some great examples of people who do it well, but I think that's one of the best concrete examples that I can think of. Try watching football. Why is it they don't win 4-0 every week and then they lose 3-0? Sometimes they're up for it and sometimes they're not. And trying to keep consistency over a long period of time is the hardest thing. And that's why when I say, 29 consecutive years of rising profitability, that's the incredible.
That's the result of the value that's been created based on the empowerment and the motivation you've given an individual. It's just an individual times how many individuals all working in one direction.
But we used to sit down and say, well, we're 5 months in, it's not looking great. This could be the year we lose the record. Is anybody prepared to give in? And then we go, nah, not this year. So it wasn't me. I had everybody around me saying, look, guys, let's just keep this run going for as long as possible. And then at least I had the sense to stand down before it ended. Right? Because nobody can run forever.
The simplicity of that, I think that's what's really lost in business today, particularly with all the external challenges on the business environment. People often forget it's about people first. And people say it, and it's a cliched term, but it's such a powerful thing. You really break it.
Let me agree with you with another story. This is another one from the book. Okay, this one's called Respect. Okay, I used to walk the dog on a Sunday morning, right, and I used to listen to TED Talks, right, and there was one day from a lady called Christine Porath, and she postulated with her research team a pretty straightforward but very interesting question, which was, if you go all around the world and people who speak completely different languages and are brought up in totally different cultures, do they still have the same expectation from work? So we're going to ask people, what's the most important thing to you? They guessed the answer. The answer was, all around the world, people are going to say, I want more money and I want better promotion prospects. She was right and she was wrong, in the sense of they went to Canada, America, Britain, Europe, India, China, Japan, but then all the small countries in between as well, just an incredible number of countries. And she was right that they got the same answer everywhere in the world, but she was wrong, it wasn't those two things. Pay and prospects were on the list everywhere you went, but the top everywhere in the world, regardless of what your language was, what culture you'd be brought in, was respect. I want to be treated with respect by my boss and the people I work alongside. And that's why my message is simple. Treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself, and you're not going to get that far wrong. And that's why I hate it when power goes to people's heads a little bit sometimes.
And you are right. It's that relationship. It's that Emotional intelligence, that respect.
I'm no different to you. I just do a different job.
But if everyone knows what part they play in the collective and take accountability for that, I would assume that's where you see the magic happening.
Oh, one of my greatest joys as a chief exec was my phone didn't ring. If there were problems, they would ring somebody else who would sort it out. Why do you need to escalate it to the chief exec when you've got teams to do things? They were empowered to say, do whatever you need to do it. Right, so people will be quite surprised if I spent an hour with you. They say, nobody's bothered you for an hour. No, they don't. I think about the next 18 months or 24 months. That's where my brains are.
And so it should be absolutely in that role. I mean, on that, in terms of growth and development as a leader, one would assume that a lot of that growth comes with a lot of change and arguably a lot of resistance to change. How have you dealt with change as a leader, both from
But
your corporate experience into your startup experience to what you do now?
these are always easy by an example. So when I set up a Adept Technology Group and they floated on the stock exchange, over a 20-year period, we reinvented it 3 times. There is no business plan that will stand a 20-year without changing, because the world's moving all around you. Now, you don't want to keep changing your mind every 2 years, otherwise you'll never get anything done. Right? But every 5 or 6 years, you've got to sit down, and people can overcomplicate strategy. So, an example, we started off selling services to small businesses. Right, and everybody said, well, you can't make any money doing that. The support costs are too high. So we said, let's just automate it. No, if you automate it, and we were one of the first to automate things, right? And we had about a third of the staff of everybody else. But we got kind of 5 or 6 years in, and we were a telecoms at this point, and BT was spending billions of pounds on what they referred to as the 21st century network. And we just sat down one day and said, what is it? What is in a sentence 21 cm? And they said, well, it's high speed now, it's 100 megabit and above. And I just said, hairdressers don't want 100 megabits. We've got the wrong customer base. This is designed for bigger people. Now, I often solve chicken and egg thinking, we've got no big customers. So we went and bought a company that had some big customers. So we had some reference case studies. And then that set us on a path of going into bigger customers and public sector. But it got to about 15. And it's amazing that Skype has now just been closed down. It shows you how the world changes. Skype had been launched, and we just sat down and just said, what is Skype? Is it telecoms? Or is it IT? Or is it a software app? And after about 10 minutes, we said, don't know, don't care. It's just telling us. It's just telling us the whole world is converging. We better start doing more IT things. And then we went on a run of getting more and more involved in IT and cloud and security and all sorts. And at the end, I think we were something like 12% telecoms. Right. Yes, we can say we ran for 20 years, but we were 3 chunks of 6 or 7 years each. And I think a business has to be honest with itself every now and again. But don't overcomplicate strategy. Just sit down and think, what's changed in my world, and is this sustainable?
And that simplistic thinking is so important, isn't it? What would you say has been the greatest lesson that you've learned from dealing with those different chunks of change, then, if you like? Has there been an overarching thing that you've learned, I guess, from those different phases, or has there been a consistency that's, brought us all the way through?
If I turn that question into what's the biggest mistake I made? Right. Looking back, I thought too small. I set that business up in 2003, and in 2006, the only way of raising money was to float on the stock exchange, on AIM, the junior bit. There was no such thing as private equity or other sources of finance at that point. And they said to me, the stock exchange has never seen a competitor to BT. We don't really understand what they look like and what the business model is. Let's do a test and raise 8 million. Of my competitors sat and watched what happened, and 18 months later put literally a 0 on the end and raised 80 million, right? So because you could see that they understood it now, there was an appetite. So sometimes there is a great advantage of being first mover, but there's sometimes where being second mover is really good as well, because you can watch and learn from somebody else's mistakes, right? So I wasn't brave enough, because there was nobody around me to say, actually, this is a massive opportunity. We should be raising shed loads of money with your experience. And once you're on a certain path, it's like being on one escalator and trying to get on another one. It's quite difficult to swap escalators, right? So I think in hindsight, I thought too small.
It's interesting because, again, that growth mindset is something that is often talked about for entrepreneurs and business leaders generally. But the evidence of delivering on that growth mindset is not always apparent immediately anyway. Obviously, they go on a journey and get to that point. But having a growth mindset from the beginning is important, because you can take that into the way which you develop your team, develop your organization, develop your customer base, develop
Yeah.
processes, you think 10 times more, don't you?
But there's also two ways of doing it, aren't there? You can grow organically with your own sales force, or you do it inorganically and start buying businesses. So to speed it up, we started to buy businesses. We were buying businesses in the kind of $500,000 to $2.5 million EBITDA range, right? So at the end, we had 70 odd million sales. So there's different ways of doing that growth. So let's not kid ourselves. There's never one way of doing anything. My normal way of explaining that is that some people spend their entire life trying to raise enough money to go skiing twice a year. Some kids just go and become ski instructors and do it every day. There's always at least two ways of doing something.
Well, yeah, and I think there's so much gems you've shared so far, and I guess as we're coming to closing, I think what's really interesting for me, you've got so many different phases of leadership, but a very consistent mission around it. But if you were talking to, I guess, the next generation of business leaders now and the economy that we're in and the future that we're walking into, what would be kind of a closing thought that you'd maybe want to share with them based on your experience?
In the next few months, we're about to launch a thing called Billionaire Business Podcast.
Okay, cool.
Right. And me and the co-host who works with me, Chris, we want to pop the myth that you can't create £1 billion business in the UK. There seems to be this idea that you've got to go to America or somewhere else to do it. It's just not true. Part of the interviews will be British people who've done it, to listen to some amazing stories and get inspiration from it. But it's not just about inspiration. It's about how do we create the next one. So we're also going to be interviewing people about how do you raise debt, how do you raise equity, how do you avoid the kind of mistakes that people make, and how do you scale things rapidly. So it's been really encouraging that once we've explained that we're trying to help the next generation grow really big businesses in the UK, we've got some phenomenal people who've said, I'll help you, I'm coming in. So, keep your eyes open for that one. We all have to learn from other people. But also, if I look back, yes, I'm a qualified accountant. Yes, I did an MBA. But most of the stuff that I learned, nobody teaches you things like how do you talk to banks and where else can you raise money from apart from banks and all that nitty gritty practical stuff. And so they dawned on. I've spent my life doing 2 million to 100 million deals. My co-host Chris has spent his life advising on 100 million to 1.5 billion deals. So between the two of us, we know a lot of people, particularly in the tech industry, right? So we've got access to people, and we're going to bring them in so that, if you like, the populace can see these things, right? And have a talk to you, and hopefully people will find that fascinating. I'm looking forward. It's going to be great fun. I really look forward to helping the next generation. And more specifically, in terms of this kind of consulting, let's go back to, I've done startups, I've done master growing businesses, I've done 43 mergers and acquisitions. There's all sorts of things that you can talk to me about. As long as you're a nice person and we have fun doing it, that's okay. If you're a miserable bugger, I don't want to know. Okay?
No, I couldn't think of a more fitting end for the conversation because, you've talked a lot about, different phases of leadership, different ways of growing, motivating people, dealing with change, growth mindset. But I think, and obviously, look forward to seeing the podcast, and we'll be happy to obviously promote and share that out here on Open Intro as well. But I think what's really important and what I've taken away is the importance of just being your authentic you.
Oh, you can't pretend.
You can't be this business owner doing this wonderful. Just who are you? Be you, and that's what will resonate. That's what will enable you to achieve some wonderful and amazing things. So I want to thank you, Ian, for your time today, and to the viewers of today's interview. Please do check Ian out, Google him, buy his books, get involved, watch the podcast when it comes out, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future. So, Ian, thank you very much again, sir.
Joel, lovely to see you. Take care.
Take care now. Bye bye.